Sarah lived in a small apartment, just big enough for her and her cat, Whiskers. The walls were painted a cheerful yellow, but lately, even the bright color couldn't chase away the shadows under Sarah's eyes. She worked as a freelance graphic designer, and work had been slow. Really slow. Every day felt like a tightrope walk, balancing bills and hoping another client would call. The fridge was getting emptier, and the stack of unopened envelopes on the kitchen counter was getting taller. Each envelope held a new worry: electricity, internet, credit card. Sarah sighed, rubbing her temples. It felt like she was drowning in a sea of debt. She loved her apartment, loved the view of the park across the street, loved the way the sunlight streamed in during the mornings. But love didn't pay the bills. Lately, she found herself staring out the window, imagining what it would be like to just pack up and leave, to escape the constant pressure. Whiskers, sensing her distress, jumped onto her lap and purred loudly. Sarah stroked his soft fur, finding a small measure of comfort in his presence. "It's okay, buddy," she whispered. "We'll figure something out." But even as she said the words, a knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. She knew she needed to find a solution, and fast. The next rent payment was looming, and if she didn't come up with the money, she didn't know what she would do. Maybe she could sell some of her belongings. But everything she owned felt essential, a piece of her life. The weight of her financial troubles was crushing her. She felt trapped, with no way out. Desperation began to creep into her thoughts, whispering dangerous ideas. Ideas that she would normally never consider. Ideas that could potentially solve all her problems, but at a great cost. The kind of cost that could change her life forever. The following Tuesday, Sarah met her friend Emily for coffee at their usual spot, a cozy cafe with mismatched chairs and the aroma of freshly baked pastries. Emily, a bubbly and optimistic teacher, always had a way of lifting Sarah's spirits, even if just for a little while. "So, how's the design world treating you?" Emily asked, stirring sugar into her latte. Sarah forced a smile. "Slow. Really slow. I'm starting to think my computer has a 'no clients allowed' virus." Emily chuckled. "Oh, come on, it can't be that bad." Sarah hesitated, then decided to confide in her friend. She explained her financial woes, the mounting bills, the dwindling savings, the constant anxiety that gnawed at her. Emily listened patiently, her expression growing more concerned with each word. "Wow, Sarah, that sounds really tough. Have you thought about getting a second job?" "I've looked," Sarah sighed. "But with the freelance work, I need the flexibility. A regular job wouldn't work." Emily tapped her chin thoughtfully. Have you considered insurance?" She paused, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "I'm kidding. Sort of. I mean, if something were to happen to your stuff." She wiggled her eyebrows. "Hypothetically speaking, of course." Sarah stared at her, a mixture of shock and disbelief on her face. "Emily. You can't be serious. That's illegal." Emily threw her hands up in mock surrender. Okay. I'm just saying, sometimes people do crazy things when they're desperate. I'm not suggesting you do anything crazy. Just trying to lighten the mood." She gave Sarah a sympathetic smile. "But seriously, have you looked into any kind of financial assistance programs? Maybe there's something out there that can help." Sarah shook her head, still reeling from Emily's suggestion. "I don't know. I need to figure something out." The thought of insurance fraud, even as a joke, lingered in her mind, a dark and tempting seed planted in fertile ground. Later that evening, Sarah sat at her computer, staring blankly at the screen. She was supposed to be working on a logo design, but her mind kept drifting back to Emily's offhand comment. Insurance fraud. The words echoed in her head, both terrifying and tempting. She told herself it was a ridiculous idea. She was a good person. She wouldn't do something like that. But the thought wouldn't go away. It was like a persistent little voice whispering in her ear, offering a way out of her troubles. She tried to focus on her work, but the numbers kept swirling in her mind. Rent, bills, groceries, it all added up to more than she could possibly earn in the next few weeks. She closed her laptop in frustration. She paced around her small apartment, whiskers following her every move. She stopped in front of the window, looking out at the twinkling lights of the city. It felt like everyone else was living a normal life, while she was stuck in this never-ending cycle of debt. She thought about Emily's suggestion again. What if she just looked into it? Just to see what it would involve. There was no harm in gathering information, right? It wasn't like she was actually going to do it. With a guilty conscience, she sat back down at her computer and opened a new browser window. She hesitated for a moment, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then, she typed in a search query, insurance fraud consequences. The search results filled the screen, warnings about jail time, fines, and a criminal record. She quickly closed the window, feeling a wave of panic wash over her. It was a terrible idea. A dangerous idea. She shouldn't even be thinking about it. But the seed had been planted. Despite the risks, the thought of a quick fix to her financial problems was too tempting to ignore. The idea that she could solve everything with one carefully planned act kept swirling around in her head, refusing to be dismissed. The next few weeks were a blur of stress and anxiety. Sarah's financial situation continued to worsen. The scene opens with a shot of a stack of bills on Sarah's kitchen counter, overflowing and casting a shadow over the otherwise bright room. Close up on an overdue notice from the electric company, stamped in bold red letters. Quick cut to Sarah's bank account on her laptop screen, a dangerously low balance staring back at her. The overdraft fees are piling up, each one a painful reminder of her financial predicament. Next, we see Sarah on a video call with a potential client. She's pitching a new logo design, but her voice is shaky, and her confidence is clearly lacking. The client politely declines her proposal, citing budget constraints. Montage continues. Sarah receives a final notice from her landlord, threatening eviction if she doesn't pay her rent within 5 days. She frantically searches online for new freelance gigs, but the competition is fierce, and she receives rejection after rejection. Sarah visits a pawn shop, hesitantly offering some of her jewelry for sale. The pawnbroker examines the items with a critical eye, offering her a pittance for her treasured possessions. She reluctantly accepts, her heart sinking with each item she hands over. Back in her apartment, Sarah opens her refrigerator to find it almost empty. A carton of milk, a wilted head of lettuce, and a few condiments are all that remain. She sighs, realizing she can barely afford groceries for the week. The final shot shows Sarah sitting at her desk late at night, staring at her computer screen with a look of utter despair. The search bar is open, and the cursor is blinking, waiting for her to type in her next desperate query. The seed planted by Emily has taken root, and Sarah is teetering on the edge of making a life-altering decision. The montage ends with a slow zoom on her face, highlighting the exhaustion and desperation in her eyes. She is at her breaking point. The cursor blinked mockingly on the screen. Sarah finally typed, "Best home insurance for theft." A flood of websites appeared, each promising the best coverage at the lowest price. Sarah clicked through them, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt like she was crossing a line, even just by researching this. She started comparing different policies, focusing on the fine print regarding theft and burglary. She looked for loopholes, for ways to maximize her potential payout. She spent hours reading customer reviews, searching for any mention of denied claims or difficult experiences. She learned about replacement cost versus actual cash value, and the importance of documenting her belongings with photos and receipts. She discovered that some policies had limits on jewelry or electronics, which could impact her potential claim. The more she researched, the more she realized how complicated insurance fraud could be. It wasn't as simple as just claiming something was stolen. She would have to be meticulous, careful, and convincing. She started searching for specific items that were commonly covered by insurance: laptops, televisions, jewelry, and designer handbags. She mentally inventoried her own belongings, assessing their value and potential for resale. She also researched the claims process, learning about the forms she would need to fill out, the questions she would be asked, and the evidence she would need to provide. She even looked up articles about common insurance fraud schemes and how to avoid getting caught. As the hours passed, Sarah's initial hesitation began to fade. The thought of receiving a large insurance payout, enough to pay off her debts and get her back on her feet, was becoming increasingly appealing. The risk still scared her, but the potential reward was too tempting to ignore. She felt like she was walking a tightrope. One wrong step could send her tumbling down. But she couldn't shake the feeling that this was her only chance, her only way out of the financial hole she had dug herself into. After days of obsessive research, Sarah finally made a decision. She chose a comprehensive insurance policy from a reputable company, one that offered high coverage limits for theft and personal property. The monthly premiums were higher than she could comfortably afford, but she justified it by telling herself it was an investment in her future. A future where she wouldn't have to worry about money. The application process was surprisingly easy. She provided her personal information, listed her belongings, and answered a few routine questions about her security measures. She exaggerated the value of some of her items, rounding up the prices of her laptop, television, and jewelry. She even claimed to own a designer handbag she had always wanted but never actually purchased. She paid the first month's premium with a credit card, wincing at the added debt but knowing it was a necessary step. Once the policy was in place, she felt a strange sense of relief wash over her. It was like she had a safety net, a backup plan in case everything else failed. But the relief was short-lived. Guilt and anxiety gnawed at her, reminding her that she was about to commit a crime. She tried to push the thoughts away, telling herself she was doing what she had to do to survive. She was a good person, forced into a desperate situation. She knew she was playing a dangerous game. If she got caught, she could face serious consequences. But the thought of losing her apartment, of ending up on the street, was even more terrifying. She had to take the risk. She had to believe that everything would work out. She had to believe that she could pull this off. The insurance policy documents arrived in the mail a few days later. Sarah stared at them, her hands trembling. It was official. She was now insured. The countdown had begun. The plan was set in motion. There was no turning back. With the insurance policy secured, Sarah began to meticulously plan the fake robbery. She treated it like a complex design project, carefully considering every detail to ensure its success. She spent hours researching crime scene staging, learning about common burglary techniques and how to make a break-in look authentic. First, she made a list of the items she would steal. She chose things that were easy to replace and had a high resale value: her laptop, her television, some jewelry, and the imaginary designer handbag she had claimed on her insurance application. She also decided to take some cash from her wallet to make it look like the thief had been after quick money. Next, she focused on staging the scene. She wanted it to look like a forced entry, but she didn't want to cause any real damage to her apartment. She decided to pry open a window with a screwdriver, making it look like someone had broken in from the outside. She would scatter some belongings around the apartment to create the illusion of a struggle. She even considered adding some fake blood, but decided that might be too risky. She didn't want to attract too much attention or raise any red flags. She wanted it to look like a simple burglary, nothing more. She practiced her story, rehearsing what she would say to the police and the insurance adjuster. She wanted to sound convincing and distraught, but not overly dramatic. She knew that any inconsistencies in her story could raise suspicion. She also made sure to remove any valuables that she didn't want to be stolen, hiding them at a friend's house for safekeeping. She didn't want to actually lose anything of sentimental value. As the day of the fake robbery approached, Sarah felt a mix of fear and excitement. She knew she was taking a huge risk, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this was her only hope. She was ready to put her plan into action. She was ready to take control of her life, even if it meant breaking the law. The day arrived, a Tuesday. Sarah woke up with a knot in her stomach. She went through her usual morning routine, trying to act normal, but her hands were shaking as she made her coffee. She kept replaying the plan in her head, making sure she hadn't forgotten anything. Around midday, she put her plan into action. She carefully pried open the window in her living room, making sure to leave visible marks on the frame. She then scattered some of her belongings around the apartment, creating a scene of disarray. She took her laptop, television, jewelry, and the imaginary designer handbag, placing them in a large duffel bag. She also took the cash from her wallet, leaving it scattered on the floor. Finally, she locked the apartment door from the outside, took a deep breath, and walked away. She went to a nearby park and sat on a bench, trying to calm her nerves. She waited for about an hour before returning to her apartment. As she approached her building, she started to hyperventilate. This was it. There was no turning back now. She unlocked the door and stepped inside, immediately gasping in horror. "Oh my God," she screamed, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. She ran around the apartment, pretending to be shocked and distraught. She called 911, her voice trembling as she reported the break-in. "My apartment has been robbed," she sobbed into the phone. "Everything is gone." She waited anxiously for the police to arrive, pacing back and forth and trying to maintain her composure. She knew that this was the moment of truth. She had to convince the police that she was a victim, not a criminal. When the police finally arrived, Sarah put on her best act. She cried, she trembled, she told them everything she thought they wanted to hear. She was a victim of a terrible crime, and she needed their help to catch the culprit. She desperately hoped they would believe her. The success of her entire plan depended on it. 2 uniformed officers arrived at Sarah's apartment, their expressions a mixture of concern and routine. They surveyed the scene, taking notes and asking Sarah questions about what had happened. "Take your time, ma'am," Officer Miller said, his voice calm and reassuring. "Just tell us everything you remember." Sarah, still feigning distress, recounted the events of the day, sticking to the story she had rehearsed. She described how she had left for a few hours to run errands and returned to find her apartment ransacked. She listed the stolen items, making sure to emphasize the value of each one. Officer Davis, the younger of the two, examined the pried-open window. He ran his fingers along the frame, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Looks like they used a screwdriver," he observed. "Pretty amateur job." He then turned his attention to Sarah. "Did you notice anything missing besides the items you mentioned?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, trying to recall if she had forgotten anything. "No, I don't think so," she said. "Just the laptop, television, jewelry, and my designer handbag." She swallowed hard, hoping they wouldn't ask too many questions about the handbag. Officer Miller took over the questioning. "Do you have any idea who might have done this, ma'am? Any enemies? Anyone who might want to harm you?" Sarah shook her head. "No, I can't think of anyone. I'm a pretty quiet person. I don't have any enemies." As the officers continued their investigation, Sarah noticed them exchanging glances. She couldn't tell if they were suspicious or just following protocol. She tried to remain calm, but her anxiety was building with each passing minute. She knew that one wrong move, one slip of the tongue, could expose her entire scheme. She just had to keep playing her part, and hope that they would buy her story. But something about their demeanor made her uneasy. It felt like they were looking for something more than just a simple burglary. After the uniformed officers left, a detective arrived. Detective Harding was a seasoned investigator with a sharp eye and an even sharper mind. He had seen countless staged robberies in his career, and he knew how to spot the subtle signs of deception. He introduced himself to Sarah, his gaze intense and unwavering. Ms. Johnson, I'm Detective Harding. I'm going to be taking over this case. He began by re-examining the scene, paying close attention to the details that the uniformed officers might have missed. He noticed that the pried-open window was surprisingly clean, with no signs of dirt or debris. He also noted that the scattered belongings seemed strategically placed, almost too perfect. He turned to Sarah, his expression unreadable. Ms. Johnson, can you tell me again exactly what time you left your apartment today? Sarah, trying to maintain her composure, repeated her story. I left around 10 a.m. to run some errands. I was gone for about 3 hours. Detective Harding nodded slowly. And you didn't notice anything unusual when you left? No one lurking around the building? Sarah shook her head. No, I didn't see anyone. Interesting, Detective Harding said, his voice low and thoughtful. Because a neighbor reported seeing you carrying a large duffel bag out of the building around 11 a.m. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't anticipated that. She tried to think quickly, searching for a plausible explanation. Oh, that, she stammered. I was just taking some things to my friend's house for safekeeping. I was worried about a possible break-in. Detective Harding raised an eyebrow. Worried about a break-in? Before the break-in actually happened? Sarah knew she was in trouble. Her carefully constructed story was starting to unravel. She had to come up with something, and fast. But the detective's piercing gaze was making it difficult to think straight. He knew something was off, and he wasn't going to let it go. He needed concrete evidence. He couldn't arrest her based on suspicion alone. Thank you for your time, Ms. Johnson. We may need to speak again. Detective Harding left Sarah's apartment, his mind racing. He was almost certain that she was involved in the robbery, but he needed more than just a hunch. He needed solid evidence to build a case against her. He returned to the precinct and reviewed the case file, looking for any leads or inconsistencies. He spoke with the uniformed officers who had initially responded to the scene, asking for their impressions of Sarah and the crime scene. He then contacted the insurance company, requesting information about Sarah's policy and her claim history. He wanted to know if she had a history of filing suspicious claims or if there were any red flags in her application. As he waited for the information to come in, he considered his options. He could try to get a warrant to search her apartment, but he didn't have enough probable cause to convince a judge. He needed something more concrete. Then, it hit him. Her laptop. If she had planned the robbery, she might have used her computer to research insurance fraud, crime scene staging, or other related topics. It was a long shot, but it was worth a try. He called Sarah and asked if she would be willing to allow the police to examine her laptop as part of the investigation. He explained that it was a routine procedure and that it could help them track down the stolen items. Sarah hesitated. She knew that her laptop contained incriminating evidence that could expose her entire scheme. But she also knew that refusing to cooperate would only make her look more suspicious. After a moment of agonizing deliberation, she agreed. Okay, detective, she said, her voice trembling slightly. You can take my laptop. Detective Harding smiled. He knew he was one step closer to cracking the case. He now just needed to hope her laptop would reveal the truth. He dispatched an officer to retrieve the laptop, knowing that it could be the key to unlocking the mystery of the staged robbery. An officer arrived to collect Sarah's laptop. As she handed it over, she tried to appear calm and cooperative, but her hands trembled slightly. She knew that this simple act could seal her fate. She watched as the officer carefully placed the laptop in an evidence bag, sealing it and labeling it with the case number. It felt like her life was being sealed away along with it. After the officer left, Sarah sank onto her couch, her mind racing. She tried to remember everything she had searched for on her laptop. How to fake a break-in, best insurance policies for theft, crime scene staging techniques, the list went on and on. She knew that if the police found those searches, she would be exposed. Her carefully constructed facade would crumble, and she would face the consequences of her actions. She considered calling a lawyer, but she couldn't afford one. Besides, what could a lawyer do? The evidence was on her laptop, plain as day. She thought about running away, disappearing and starting a new life somewhere else. But she knew that wouldn't solve anything. She would still be a criminal, living in fear of getting caught. She was trapped. She had made a terrible mistake, and now she was paying the price. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the anxiety and regret that were consuming her. She knew that the next few hours would be the longest of her life. She could only wait and see what the police found on her laptop. And hope that somehow, at the police precinct, a forensic technician named Mark carefully unpacked Sarah's laptop. He was a meticulous and experienced professional, skilled at uncovering digital evidence that could make or break a case. He connected the laptop to his workstation and booted it up, bypassing the password with ease. He knew that even if Sarah had tried to delete her search history, there was a good chance he could recover it. He began by examining the browser history, filtering the results by date and time to focus on the period leading up to the robbery. As he scrolled through the list of websites Sarah had visited, his eyes widened in surprise. There it was, a treasure trove of incriminating evidence: how to fake a break-in, best insurance policies for theft, crime scene staging techniques, items to claim in a robbery, insurance fraud penalties. The searches were detailed and specific, leaving no doubt about Sarah's intentions. He also found evidence that Sarah had been researching insurance companies and comparing policies, paying close attention to the coverage limits and exclusions. He even found a document outlining her plan to stage the robbery, including the items she would steal and how she would arrange the scene. Mark printed out the relevant search history and documents, carefully labeling each page with the date, time, and case number. He knew that this evidence would be crucial in building a case against Sarah. He immediately notified Detective Harding, informing him of his findings. "Detective, I think we've got her," he said. "Her laptop is full of evidence that she planned this whole thing." Detective Harding smiled. He knew it. He thanked Mark for his work and made his way to Sarah's apartment, ready to confront her with the evidence and bring her in for questioning. The game was up. Her digital footprint had betrayed her. Detective Harding arrived back at Sarah's apartment, a stack of printed documents in his hand. He knocked on the door, his expression grim. Sarah opened the door, her face pale and drawn. She knew what was coming. The jig was up. "Ms. Johnson," Detective Harding said, his voice firm but respectful. "I need you to come down to the precinct with me. We have some questions we need to ask you." Sarah didn't resist. She knew there was no point in denying the truth any longer. She had been caught red-handed. At the precinct, Detective Harding led Sarah to an interrogation room, a small, sparsely furnished space with a table and 2 chairs. He placed the printed documents on the table in front of her. "Ms. Johnson," he said, "these are printouts of your internet search history. Can you explain to me why you were searching for how to fake a break-in and best items to claim in a robbery?" Sarah stared at the documents, her eyes welling up with tears. She knew she couldn't lie her way out of this one. The evidence was too damning. She stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "I can explain." Detective Harding leaned forward, his gaze intense. "I'm listening, Ms. Johnson." Sarah took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. She knew that her future depended on what she said next. She had to come up with a believable explanation, something that would convince Detective Harding that she wasn't a criminal, just a desperate woman who had made a terrible mistake. But how? The truth was staring her in the face, and it was ugly. "I was doing research," she started, her voice trembling. "For a story." "A story, Ms. Johnson?" Detective Harding said, his voice laced with skepticism. "Is that why you were also researching insurance fraud penalties and how to avoid getting caught?" Sarah's mind raced. She had to stick to her story, no matter how ridiculous it sounded. "Yes," she insisted, her voice trembling. I'm a writer. I was working on a crime novel. I needed to do research to make it realistic. Detective Harding leaned back in his chair, studying her intently. So, you're telling me that you spent hours researching how to commit insurance fraud, staged a break-in at your own apartment, and then filed a false police report, all in the name of research for a crime novel? Sarah nodded, her eyes fixed on the table. Yes, that's exactly what happened. Detective Harding picked up one of the printouts, pointing to a specific search query. And what about this, Ms. Johnson? Best items to claim in a robbery. Was that also research for your novel? Or were you perhaps compiling a list of items that you could easily replace with the insurance money? Sarah's face flushed. She knew she was losing ground. Her story was falling apart under Detective Harding's relentless questioning. She stammered, struggling to find an answer. I was just trying to get into the mind of a criminal. Detective Harding sighed, shaking his head in disbelief. Ms. Johnson, I've been doing this job for a long time. I've heard a lot of excuses, but this one takes the cake. Do you really expect me to believe that you went to all this trouble just to write a story? Sarah knew that he didn't believe her. She could see it in his eyes. But she had to keep trying. She had to cling to her story, even if it was a lie. She had come this far. She couldn't give up now. But how much longer could she keep up the charade? The pressure was crushing her. She felt like she was about to break. She just needed to hold on, to find a way to convince him. But what could she possibly say? Detective Harding leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Let's talk about the window, Ms. Johnson. The one that was supposedly pried open by a burglar. My officers tell me it was a rather amateur job. Almost staged, one might say. Sarah's breath hitched. She had been so careful, or so she thought. And then there's the list of stolen items, Detective Harding continued, his eyes narrowing. A laptop, a television, some jewelry, and a designer handbag. Funny thing is, Ms. Johnson, you told your insurance company you owned that handbag, but you never actually bought it, did you? It's a phantom handbag, existing only on paper. Sarah's carefully constructed wall of lies was crumbling around her. She could feel the tears welling up in her eyes. She could feel her carefully constructed facade cracking, revealing the desperate and frightened woman beneath. Detective Harding's voice softened, but his gaze remained unwavering. Ms. Johnson, I understand that you're going through a difficult time. Financial problems can be incredibly stressful. But faking a robbery and committing insurance fraud is not the answer. It's a serious crime, and it has serious consequences. He paused, giving her a chance to respond. I think it's time you told me the truth, Ms. Johnson. Tell me what really happened. Sarah's shoulders slumped. The fight had gone out of her. She knew she couldn't keep up the pretense any longer. The evidence was overwhelming, and Detective Harding's gentle but persistent questioning had worn her down. Tears streamed down her face as she finally broke down. Okay, she sobbed, her voice choked with emotion. Okay, I did it. I faked the robbery. Detective Harding nodded, his expression somber. Tell me why, Ms. Johnson. Tell me why you did this. Sarah, her voice trembling, began to recount her financial struggles, the mounting bills, the dwindling savings, the constant anxiety that had driven her to the brink. She explained how Emily's comment about insurance had planted the seed in her mind, and how the idea had grown more appealing as her situation worsened. She described the desperation that had consumed her, clouding her judgment and leading her to make a terrible decision. I didn't know what else to do, she cried. I was so scared. I thought this was my only way out. The dam had broken, and the truth was flowing out of her like a torrent. She confessed everything, laying bare her soul in the sterile interrogation room. The relief of finally admitting the truth was almost as overwhelming as the fear of the consequences. As Sarah's confession poured out, she began to sob uncontrollably. She pleaded with Detective Harding to understand her desperation. "I know what I did was wrong," she cried, "terribly wrong. I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt anyone. I just didn't see any other way out." She begged for leniency, explaining that she had no prior criminal record and that she was genuinely remorseful for her actions. She promised to cooperate fully with the investigation and to do whatever she could to make amends for the damage she had caused. "Please, Detective," she pleaded, her voice cracking with emotion. "I'll pay back the insurance money. I'll do community service. I'll do anything. Just please don't send me to jail." She looked at Detective Harding, her eyes filled with desperation and fear. She knew that her fate was in his hands. She had broken the law, and now she had to face the consequences. But she hoped that he would see her as more than just a criminal. She hoped that he would see her as a human being who had made a terrible mistake, driven by circumstances beyond her control. She told him about Whiskers, her cat, and how she was afraid of what would happen to him if she went to jail. He was her only family, her only companion. The thought of leaving him alone was unbearable. She also spoke about her dreams and aspirations, her desire to be a successful graphic designer, to make a positive contribution to the world. She knew that her actions had jeopardized everything she had worked for, but she hoped that she could still find a way to rebuild her life. As she finished her plea, she waited anxiously for Detective Harding to respond. The silence in the interrogation room was deafening. She could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She knew that his decision would determine the course of her future. Would he show her mercy, or would he throw the book at her? The suspense was agonizing. Detective Harding listened intently, his expression thoughtful. He had seen a lot of people in his career, good people who had made bad choices. He could sense that Sarah was genuinely remorseful, but he also knew that he had a duty to uphold the law. "Ms. Johnson," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "I appreciate your honesty, and I understand the difficult circumstances you were facing. But insurance fraud is a serious crime, and there are consequences for your actions." He explained that she would be charged with filing a false police report and attempting to commit insurance fraud. The district attorney would ultimately decide whether to prosecute her and what the appropriate sentence would be. "I can't make any promises, Ms. Johnson," Detective Harding said. "But I will make sure that the district attorney is aware of your cooperation and your remorse. I will also recommend that they consider your lack of prior criminal record and your willingness to make restitution." He explained that even if she wasn't sentenced to jail time, she could still face significant fines, probation, and a criminal record that could impact her future employment opportunities. She would also likely have to repay the insurance company for any money they had paid out as a result of her false claim. He advised her to hire a lawyer and to cooperate fully with the legal process. He also encouraged her to seek counseling to address the underlying issues that had led her to commit the crime. "This is not the end of the world, Ms. Johnson," Detective Harding said, offering a small smile. "You made a mistake, but you can learn from it and move on. Just be honest, take responsibility for your actions, and try to make amends for the harm you have caused." He handed her a card with his contact information and escorted her out of the interrogation room. As she walked out of the precinct, Sarah stepped out of the police station into the cool evening air. The city lights seemed to mock her. She felt like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. She walked slowly back to her apartment, dreading what awaited her. She pictured Whiskers, waiting patiently by the door, unaware of the turmoil that was consuming her life. The next few months were a whirlwind of legal proceedings. Sarah hired a lawyer, a kind and compassionate woman who understood her situation and fought tirelessly on her behalf. She cooperated fully with the investigation, providing all the information she could to help them understand her motives and her actions. She pleaded guilty to the charges against her, hoping for a more lenient sentence. The district attorney, taking into account her remorse, her lack of prior criminal record, and Detective Harding's recommendation, agreed to a plea bargain. Sarah was sentenced to 5 years of probation, ordered to perform 200 hours of community service, and ordered to repay the insurance company for their expenses. The final scene shows Sarah, several months later, volunteering at a local animal shelter. She's cleaning cages and feeding the animals, her face etched with a quiet determination. She's wearing simple clothes, her designer handbag long forgotten. She looks tired, but there's a sense of peace in her eyes that wasn't there before. She's still struggling financially, but she's managing to make ends meet. She's also attending counseling sessions, working to address the underlying issues that led her to commit the crime. One day, Emily visits her at the shelter. She apologizes profusely for her joking suggestion that had set everything in motion. Sarah accepts her apology, acknowledging that she ultimately made her own choices. Sarah is also working on rebuilding her graphic design career, slowly but surely. She's taken on some freelance projects, and she's starting to gain back the trust of her clients. The final shot shows Sarah back in her apartment, which is now sparsely furnished but clean and bright. Whiskers is curled up on her lap, purring contentedly. She's working on her laptop, designing a logo for a local charity. She looks out the window at the park across the street, a small smile playing on her lips. She knows that she has a long road ahead of her, but she's determined to make the most of it. She's learned a valuable lesson about honesty, responsibility, and the importance of making ethical choices. She has faced the consequences of her actions, and she is finally on the path to redemption. The end.